Dad, you're completely helpless without Mom. You know that moment when your own children decide you're incompetent, when the people who used to ask you to fix everything suddenly act like you can't tie your shoes? My daughter Rachel's voice echoed through my kitchen, and I watched my coffee cup shake in my hands. Not from age, I was only 71, but from the shock of being declared useless by my own blood. Look at yourself, Eugene, my other daughter Nicole said, gesturing around our family home like it was a crime scene. This place is falling apart. You haven't done laundry in weeks. When's the last time you showered? I wanted to tell them I'd been doing my own laundry since I was 12 years old on my father's farm, that I'd showered yesterday morning, same as always, that the only thing falling apart was their patience with having a grieving father who missed his wife. But when your daughters are building a case against you, facts don't seem to matter. Ruth has been gone for 3 weeks, Rachel continued, pulling out her phone to take pictures of the dishes in my sink. 3 weeks, and you're already living like this. Ruth, my wife of 48 years, the woman who'd held my hand through Vietnam, through building our construction business from nothing, through raising these 2 ungrateful daughters who were now treating me like a burden. I'm managing just fine, I said quietly, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true. The house did feel different without Ruth. Emptier, like all the systems we'd built together over 5 decades had suddenly stopped working. This isn't managing, Dad, Nicole said, opening my refrigerator and making disapproving sounds. This is deteriorating. Mom took care of everything, and now that she's gone, you're proving you can't handle basic life skills. Basic life skills. Like I was a teenager instead of a man who'd run a successful business, raised 2 children, and maintained this house for longer than they'd been alive. They didn't mention me once without mentioning the house. We've been talking, Rachel said, exchanging a look with Nicole that told me they'd rehearsed this conversation, and we think you need professional help. No one spoke after that. The refrigerator hummed. My coffee went cold in my hands. I could smell old coffee and dish soap. Professional help? Assisted living, Nicole clarified. Somewhere with meal services, housekeeping, medication management. Somewhere you'll be safe. Safe. The word hung in the air like a threat disguised as concern. I thought about Ruth, about the conversations we'd had during her final months, how she'd watch our daughters visit and shake her head after they left. Eugene, she'd whispered one afternoon while I adjusted her pillows. They think love means control. Don't let them control you when I'm gone. I'd promised her I wouldn't, but sitting there listening to Rachel and Nicole plan my future like I wasn't in the room, I wondered how I was supposed to keep that promise when I wasn't even sure I could keep myself together. We've already looked at several facilities, Rachel said, pulling out brochures with pictures of smiling elderly people doing crafts. Sunnybrook Manor has excellent reviews. They have a waiting list, but they can take you next month. Next month. They'd already made arrangements without asking me. I don't want to live in a facility, I said. Dad, what you want isn't really relevant anymore, Nicole replied, and there was something cold in her voice that reminded me of Ruth's mother, the woman Ruth had spent 30 years trying not to become. This is about what you need, and you clearly need supervision. That's when I realized this wasn't a conversation. This was a notification. They'd already decided my fate, and they were here to inform me of it. What they didn't know was that Ruth had seen this coming, and she'd left me something that would change everything. I just had to figure out how to use it. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted, Ben Morrison, Ruth's lawyer and our friend for 20 years. His voice was warm but concerned when I explained what my daughters were planning. Eugene, I need you to come to my office today, Ben said. There's something Ruth left for you, something she made me promise not to mention unless this exact situation arose. 2 hours later, I sat in Ben's downtown office while he pulled a sealed envelope from his safe. My name was written on it in Ruth's careful handwriting, along with a date from 6 months before she died. She was very specific about when I could give this to you, Ben said gently. If your daughters tried to have you declared incompetent or forced into supervised living, I was to open this immediately. The letter was written on Ruth's personal stationery, the paper with the little blue flowers she'd always loved. Her handwriting was shaky. The cancer had already been affecting her coordination, but the words were clear and deliberate. The paper smelled faintly like her perfume. My dearest Eugene, if you're reading this, then Rachel and Nicole have tried to take control of your life. I've watched them do this their entire adult lives, see a problem, and immediately try to manage it, even when no management is needed. You are not helpless. You built a successful business. You've maintained our home for decades. You've taken care of me through every illness and challenge. You're capable of living independently, and more importantly, you have the right to try, even if you make mistakes. But I know our daughters. They'll try to use your grief against you. They'll point to normal responses to loss and call them incompetence. They'll make you doubt yourself until you believe you need them to make decisions for you. I hope I'm wrong about them. I pray I am. I wish I were. That's why I've made arrangements. Eugene, I've established a trust fund with $500,000 that's separate from our joint accounts. It's yours, but only if you remain living independently. If you're placed in any kind of supervised care facility against your will, the trust dissolves and the money goes to charity. I've also included provisions in my will that Rachel and Nicole don't know about. If they try to have you declared incompetent or force you into a facility, they forfeit their inheritance entirely. All of it, the house, the business assets, everything, goes to you to do with as you choose. I love our daughters, but I won't let them steal your independence in the name of caring for you. Fight for yourself, Eugene. Fight for your right to live on your own terms. The choice is yours, but make it knowing that I believe in your strength even when grief makes you forget you have it. I read the letter twice, my hands trembling. Ruth had planned for this. She'd seen what I couldn't see, that our daughter's version of love looked a lot like control. There's more, Ben said, pulling out a legal document. She also appointed me as an advocate to challenge any competency proceedings they might try to file, and she arranged for a comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation to be conducted, if needed, to prove your mental capacity. She thought of everything, I whispered. She knew them well, Ben replied. Ruth loved Rachel and Nicole, but she understood their weaknesses. She was determined to protect your right to choose your own path. I thought about the conversation yesterday, about how my daughters had already picked out a facility and set a timeline. They'd assumed I had no options, no resources, no way to resist their plans. They'd underestimated both me and the woman they claimed to be honoring. What do I need to do? I asked. Ben smiled. First, we document everything. Every conversation, every pressure tactic, every attempt to manipulate you into giving up your independence. Then, when they make their formal move, and they will, we'll be ready. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Rachel and Nicole arrived at my house with a woman introduced as Dr. Patricia Vance, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in capacity evaluations. Dad, we're worried about you, Rachel began, but I could see the determination in her eyes. This wasn't worry. This was strategy. Dr. Vance has agreed to do an assessment to help us understand your current mental state. And based on that assessment, Nicole added, we can make informed decisions about your care. Decisions, not recommendations. Decisions. Dr. Vance was professional and thorough, asking me questions about my daily routine, my memory, my ability to manage finances. She had me perform simple tasks, counting backwards, remembering word lists, drawing shapes. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast this morning? Dr. Vance asked. You don't need to ask him that, Nicole interrupted. He struggles with words lately. I answered anyway, slowly, clearly. Oatmeal with blueberries, orange juice, 2 cups of coffee. I could see my daughters watching for signs of confusion or failure, but there weren't any to find. After an hour, Dr. Vance spoke privately with Rachel and Nicole while I waited in the kitchen. Through the door, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Functioning well cognitively, grief response, not cognitive decline. No medical basis for supervised care. When they returned, Rachel's face was tight with frustration. Dr. Vance says you're mentally competent, she said, like this was somehow disappointing news. But, Nicole jumped in, mental competence doesn't mean you're capable of independent living. The state of this house, your appearance, your isolation, these are signs of decline. Dr. Vance looked uncomfortable. Actually, what I observed are normal grief responses, loss of motivation, disrupted routines, social withdrawal. These are expected after the death of a longtime spouse. They don't indicate inability to live independently. But he could deteriorate, Rachel pressed. Grief can lead to depression, which can lead to serious problems. That's possible, Dr. Vance acknowledged, but it's also possible he'll adapt and recover. Premature intervention can actually interfere with the natural healing process. After Dr. Vance left, my daughters regrouped quickly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Okay, so you passed the evaluation, Nicole said, but that doesn't change the fact that you're not taking care of yourself. We can't just sit back and watch you fall apart. What if you fell? What if you had a medical emergency? What if you forgot to pay bills or take medications? I've managed my medications and bills for 71 years, I said. I think I can handle a few more. Mom managed everything, Rachel snapped. You just went along with what she arranged. Now that she's gone, you don't even know where to start. That stung because it contained a grain of truth. Ruth had handled many of our administrative details, kept our social calendar, reminded me about appointments, but she'd done those things because she enjoyed organizing, not because I was incapable. We're not backing down on this, Nicole said. If you won't voluntarily move to a safe environment, we'll find another way to make it happen. Another way. The threat was clear. After they left, I called Ben Morrison. They're going to try to have me declared incompetent, I told him. Let them try, Ben said. Ruth prepared for that too. The competency hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Rachel and Nicole had hired a lawyer, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Ross who specialized in elder law. They were claiming I was unable to manage my affairs due to cognitive decline brought on by grief and depression. Ben had prepared meticulously. He'd arranged for my own psychological evaluation by Dr. Michael Torres, a respected neuropsychologist who found no evidence of cognitive impairment. He'd documented my financial management, bills paid on time, accounts balanced, investments properly maintained. He'd even had my primary care physician write a letter confirming my physical and mental health. But the most important evidence was Ruth's letter and the provisions she'd built into her will. The hearing took place in Judge Karen Walsh's courtroom. The courtroom was cold, not emotionally, literally. Rachel and Nicole sat with their lawyer, presenting documentation of my supposed decline, photographs of my messy kitchen, testimony about my deteriorating appearance, claims about my inability to maintain our home. Nobody looked at me during their presentation. Papers rustled, a chair creaked. Their case boiled down to this: I was grieving, therefore I was incompetent. Because I missed Ruth and struggled with motivation, I needed someone else to make decisions for me. When Ben presented our defense, the tide shifted dramatically. First, he introduced Ruth's letter and the trust fund provisions. Then came Dr. Torres's evaluation, which found my cognitive abilities to be above average for my age group. Finally, Ben presented recordings of my daughter's conversations that I'd made with his guidance. In them, Rachel and Nicole discussed their plans to get control of Dad's situation. Judge Walsh's decision was swift and decisive. The court finds no evidence of incompetence on the part of Eugene Morrison. The petitioners have failed to demonstrate that Mr. Morrison is unable to manage his affairs or make reasoned decisions about his living situation. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that this petition is motivated more by the petitioner's preferences than by genuine concern for Mr. Morrison's welfare. She looked directly at Rachel and Nicole. Grief is not a medical condition requiring supervised care. Mr. Morrison has the right to live independently, to make his own mistakes, and to choose his own path, even if his daughters disagree with those choices. Case dismissed. In the hallway after the hearing, Rachel and Nicole approached me with expressions I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but something colder. "This isn't over," Rachel said quietly. Rachel didn't look at me when she said it. "Eventually, you'll need help, and when you do, don't expect us to be available. You're choosing independence over family," Nicole added. "Mom would be ashamed of how selfish you're being, but I knew better. Ruth wouldn't be ashamed. She'd be proud that I'd fought for the right she'd tried to protect. Your mother loved me enough to trust my judgment," I replied. "Maybe you should try doing the same." They left without another word, and I haven't seen them since. That was 6 months ago. Today I'm sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen Rachel photographed as evidence of my incompetence, drinking my morning coffee and reading the newspaper. The dishes are clean, the bills are paid, and I'm wearing a fresh shirt because I chose to, not because someone reminded me. The house is quiet without Ruth, but it's not empty. The chair across from me was still empty. It's full of memories we made together, decisions we shared, and the trust she placed in me to live my life on my own terms. I've hired a housekeeper who comes twice a week, not because I need supervision, but because it's easier than doing everything myself. I've joined a grief support group where I've met other people learning to rebuild their lives after loss. Most importantly, I've learned the difference between help and control. Ruth understood this. She knew that love doesn't mean protecting someone from every possible mistake or difficulty. Love means trusting someone to handle their own challenges, even when it's hard to watch. The $500,000 from Ruth's trust fund sits in my account, untouched. I don't need it yet, but knowing it's there gives me options. Freedom isn't about having unlimited resources. It's about having choices. Sometimes I wonder if Rachel and Nicole will ever understand what they lost when they chose control over trust, not just their inheritance, though Ruth's will was clear about the consequences of their actions, but the relationship we might have had if they'd been willing to support me instead of trying to manage me. But that's their choice to make, just like living independently was mine. Last month, I received a letter from Rachel. Not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement that maybe they'd been wrong to try to force me into assisted living. She mentioned that Nicole was seeing a therapist to work on her need to control other people's choices. I wrote back, keeping the door open but making no promises. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Meanwhile, I've been dating. Patricia is a widow I met at the grief support group, and she understands both loss and the importance of maintaining independence. We have dinner together twice a week, go to movies, take walks around the lake where Ruth and I used to feed the ducks. Patricia has adult children too, and they've made similar suggestions about assisted living and supervised care. But she's held her ground, supported by her own version of what Ruth left me, the knowledge that she's capable of making her own decisions. Yesterday, I was fixing a loose board on my front porch when my neighbor Tom stopped by to chat. He's 83 and has been living alone since his wife died 5 years ago. "Your daughter's still giving you trouble about living by yourself?" he asked. "Not lately," I said. "They've moved on to other concerns." "Mine tried the same thing," Tom laughed. "Wanted to put me in one of those places where they cut your meat for you and remind you to brush your teeth. I told them I'd been cutting my own meat for 8 decades and I wasn't about to stop now." "How'd you convince them to back off?" "Same way you did, I suspect, by proving I was more stubborn than they were determined." We stood there for a moment, 2 old men who'd refused to go quietly into managed living. "You know what the irony is?" Tom said. "They think they're protecting us from loneliness, but what they're really trying to do is make us disappear. Put us somewhere safe and tidy where we don't have to be anyone's responsibility." "Ruth saw that," I said. "That's why she made sure I had a choice." "Smart woman, your Ruth." She knew the difference between caring for someone and caring about them. After Tom left, I sat on my porch and thought about that distinction. Caring for someone means taking responsibility for their needs. Caring about someone means respecting their right to meet their own needs, even when they might struggle or fail. Ruth cared about me enough to trust me with my own life. My daughters, with all their good intentions, had tried to care for me by taking that life away. The difference, I've learned, is everything. Tonight, I'll cook myself dinner, watch the news, and maybe call Patricia to see if she wants to take a walk tomorrow. I'll make these decisions because I can, because Ruth made sure I could, and because choosing my own path, even when it's difficult, is better than having someone else choose it for me. Helpless isn't about being alone or struggling with grief or needing time to figure things out. Helpless is letting other people convince you that you can't handle your own life. And thanks to Ruth, I never have to learn what that feels like. Sometimes I still wait for her key in the door.